Happy Tuesday, DawgNation. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I'm in a great mood because it's kind of like short sleeve weather here today. At least it felt like that way to me. Storms last night, kind of weird, but sun shining this morning. So why not put a little short sleeve shirt on and kind of feel pretty good as you kind of get the day started here. Hopefully we'll keep your day going well throughout the course of the next few minutes. Fun show for us coming up. A lot on everything going on around Georgia football. We'll have some recruiting stuff. Very interesting fan response, apparently, to a former, we'll call him air quotes here, former Georgia player. We'll talk about that on the program today. And I'm going to begin with this. Stern admonition, and I mean that in the strongest terms possible. Stern admonition to the Florida Gators for this ridiculous narrative that they keep trying to push out there over and over and over again. It's silly. It's getting even sillier. We'll talk about why today as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I'm not going to lie to you, there's been a little something I've been just a little bit concerned about as of late. That we've had such a good time enjoying the turmoil going on in Tennessee and the ludicrous nature in which Jeremy Pruitt was fired and the end of the Philip Fulmer era, and people are just having a really good time with that right now, and I'm right there with you enjoying that too, and who am I to stand in the way of anybody having a good time? But that has been so enjoyable for so many people. I'm almost just a little bit worried we're kind of getting off brand here a little bit. We're kind of making folks forget that first and foremost, we are Gator haters. We may mock Tennessee and we may revel in their misery, and certainly there has been plenty of that to go around over the last few weeks, but primarily, first and foremost, in this house, we are Gator haters. We believe that is the number one rival for the Georgia Bulldogs, and we believe there is no sweeter feeling in all of the SEC than getting a victory over those lousy, stinking Gators. We got Eddie, the official mascot of DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, on the desk to prove that. We've got the golden shoe, which we give out every single day. We have been giving that out lately for some Tennessee stuff, and admittedly, we'll do that again today before the show is done, but we are Gator haters. It is with that in mind that I offer some, let's call it friendly advice to my folks down there in Gainesville. Stern admonition, if you will, but a little bit of friendly advice about just be careful the narrative that you're trying to push right now, because I'm not quite so sure you realize just how silly this stuff starts to sound after a little while. There was a guy, and I don't know this person, but he put out a tweet, I think it was yesterday, that kind of got some attention, asking Ben Troop, former Florida Gator tight end, also a guy who spent some time in the NFL, asking him what did he make of Tom Brady and the fact that Brady has now gone to Super Bowl, in 3 different decades. In fact, let's see that tweet so people can see this. Christian Gokul is the guy's name. Apparently he works for ESPN. I apologize to Christian. I'm not familiar with his work, but he says on Twitter that Tom Brady's going to play in a Super Bowl now in 3 separate decades. I asked Ben Troop, what's one thing he's done in 3 separate decades? His answer, seen Georgia not win a national championship. Ha, 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 ha. Insert your own laugh track there for that. Now, the one thing I do feel like we're pretty good about around here is that we are self-reflective. We are introspective. We see the world as it is, not the way that we wish it was. And the one thing on this program that we do not deny, it has been too long since Georgia has won a national championship. We all admit that. Georgia fans themselves are the most likely to be aware of that. It's Georgia fans themselves who are the most restless about all of that. It's the pressure that hangs over the head of Georgia coach Kirby Smart and JT Daniels and all the key players of the upcoming season. This is not new territory for this program, and no one that I think watches or listens to this show, or certainly me who host this show, any of the guests who come on this show, no one seems to run from that. But this is where I got to encourage my folks down there in Gainesville, Florida, to be a little bit careful here. Maybe some of the self-reflection that we participate in here, some of the hard work to be introspective that we do around here, maybe some of the folks around Florida need to also do a little bit of the same thing. Because when Ben Troop, the former Gator, says, I hadn't seen Georgia win a national championship in decades and decades and decades, Florida fans just think that's the funniest thing in the world because they feel like their success they've enjoyed, and we've talked about this before, they feel like the success they've enjoyed is so much more recent than what Georgia's has been. They feel like their championships are so much more modern than what Georgia's are. But let's be real about this for a moment. When was the last Florida national championship? It was 2008, right? Now listen, I can remember that. Many of you who watch the show, a good portion of our audience, you are old enough to remember that. But that's like, 13 years ago now? Am I doing the math right in my head? That means the guys who will sign as a part of the class of 2022 were 4 or 5 years old at that time. They're pre-K or kindergarten. The last time that Florida won a national championship, if you want to kind of make the same comparison, Tim Tebow, the quarterback on that team, Tim Tebow is just as old to those guys as Bo Jackson was to me when I was that same age, or Herschel Walker was maybe a little bit before that. It's kind of the same age from, how these guys view that now to how, I would have viewed that back then when I was 18 years old. It was something that had kind of happened in the distant past. Now, as you get older, the years kind of go by a little faster. The decades seem to kind of go by a little faster too. So for someone like me who's got just a little bit of gray hair, 2008 doesn't seem so long ago. But to the kids who are about to sign letters of intent or just sign letters of intent, the people who played in those games back in 2008, you know what the current players call those players? Pawpaw. It's been that long ago to the current recruits since Florida's won its national championship. So Gators fans, just be real careful here for a moment. I know you think it's real cute to say it's been, what was it that Florida did for its spring game a couple years ago? The official attendance, back when we did have attendance for spring games, back when we even still had spring games. Florida thought it was really cute with how many days it had been since Georgia had won a national championship, and that just seems so funny to Florida fans because they can remember 2008 when they won their last title. Here's the thing you got to remember, though. You may remember that title, but recruits don't, and they are the constituency, easy for me to say, they are the constituency that matters most. The Florida program that current recruits have grown up with, or just current fans who are kind of that college age, the program they've grown up with around Florida is not a very impressive one. The Georgia brand just as big, if not bigger, I would say bigger right now, because of the lack of success that Florida has enjoyed. Keep that in mind, and we'll see you in Jacksonville coming up later on the month of October. Let me shift gears now and do something completely different because I thought this was interesting. Our buddy Mike Griffith had a story the other day at DawgNation.com. Obviously, folks gathering around Mobile. Sounds like the Senior Bowl is a little different this year than it's kind of been in the past, but Mobile, kind of the gathering spot for the Senior Bowl. Also, I guess an important place to be right now is the birthplace of the legendary Hank Aaron, who obviously passed away on Friday. Mobile, his hometown, so kind of a cool time to think about that as well. But from a football standpoint, everybody's kind of gathered there, looking forward to seeing how guys are doing. I saw some breaking news just before he came on the show. I guess Devontae Smith, the Alabama wide receiver, has decided he did not want to be weighed at the Senior Bowl. I've never heard anybody turn down the chance to be weighed and measured, but apparently this morning he didn't want to do that. But nonetheless, one of the real curiosities amongst Georgia fans is to see how things go with Jamie Newman, the quarterback who could have been at UGA, the quarterback that was at UGA but chose to opt out of the season just before the season began. A lot of Georgia fans are kind of left to wonder, well, how good really is Jamie Newman? You saw him at Wake Forest. Sometimes that's hard to judge because Wake Forest doesn't have elite talent. You really don't know how good Newman could have been. You were told by all these people that Newman was going to be great at UGA. David Pollack at one point in time said he was going to pick Georgia to win the national championship because of Jamie Newman. Newman's Heisman odds around this time a year ago are actually better than even JT Daniels are right now. So there was a lot of hype around Jamie Newman, and then right before the season began, just like that, it just sort of poof, all disappeared as Newman, opted out for what we were kind of told were coronavirus reasons, but people were kind of left to wonder what's the real story here for why he's not here. For what it's worth, at the time, Smart obviously acknowledging the departure, but kind of trying to downplay the significance of it a little bit. This is what Smart said on that back then.
With the rotation we had going, it probably didn't impact us as much as it would have had he been there the entire time. We had mini camp days, I call them, 1 through I think 10 or 1 through 11, that he wasn't able to go in throughout the first half of those. The later part is when he got there. So we were able to give those reps to other guys. And we're probably fortunate that it happened when it happened in terms of trying to get a guy ready, because if it had gone, up until this point or even later, I can't imagine where we would be. But those reps would have been doled out between the other guys, so they certainly would have got more. And it was a concern of ours when you start thinking about spring practice not being there, being able to get the reps.
Yeah, so that's smart, kind of downplaying that at the time. Georgia fans themselves, though, did not really want to downplay this. They were pretty disappointed after all they'd heard about Newman, for Newman to kind of fizzle out and decide not to play. Now, listen, we've said this over and over again, and we'll keep saying this. If Newman's reasons for not playing at Georgia really were related to the coronavirus, obviously no one could fault him for that. This is a disease that's ravaged our country, certainly, ravaged our state, and it's impacted so many people. And if that was Newman's reason for not playing, then I think you shake his hand, you wish him well. There was some assumptions on the part of many UGA fans that it kind of maybe wasn't about that. Whatever it was about, I guess different people may have different opinions, but obviously there was a little bit of hurt feelings related to Newman kind of seemingly leaving Georgia high and dry when he chose to leave the program. So much so that this week in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, a place that Newman is attending, there had been some debate about would he wear a Wake Forest, helmet during the practices and game? Would he wear the Georgia helmet or practices during the game? I thought that Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, gave an interesting quote to Mike Griffith. This is what Nagy says to the pages of DawgNation.com. We had to put him, meaning Jamie Newman, we had to put him in a Wake Forest stuff. If we put him in Georgia stuff, the vitriol among DawgNation on Twitter has been unbelievable. Now, listen, I would never encourage anyone to kind of be nasty on Twitter. I think there's way too much of that in the world as there is. I truly do. But when it comes to being upset with Jamie Newman and maybe not wanting Newman to, kind of be represented in the Georgia uniform, I absolutely understand where Georgia fans are kind of coming from on that. Newman is not a former Georgia player. He may have been briefly enrolled at UGA, but he never played a game at Georgia. And frankly, the G on the side of his helmet during a Senior Bowl thing would be just as out of place as it would be on any other players who were there. And there's nothing wrong with saying, listen, you made a commitment to the program, you showed up, and you didn't fulfill your end of that. So, listen, what you do from here on out is your business, but we're not going to be a fan of you given the way this kind of worked out here. And around here, I would say we're a pretty player-friendly show. We don't bash players. We don't trash players. I don't want anybody trashing Jamie Newman on Twitter either, but not wanting to see him wear a Georgia G on the side of his helmet, I don't think that should be controversial at all. I don't think he's a former Georgia player, and frankly, I don't think the G belongs anywhere close to him. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., here on the DawgNation video channels, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon as well on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us today, and a big, big thanks to our friends at ESOG for making this all possible. They are a solutions-based company. And listen, I'm a homeowner. Many of you are homeowners. And when it comes to problems that you may have around your home and the hope that you can find a sensible solution for those problems, some of this stuff can really kind of keep you up at night, can kind of keep you worried, especially if you see water creeping in. You had a bunch of rain last night, a lot of storms here around the Atlanta area. If that means new wet spots show up in your garage or in your basement, crawl space area, that can be a real concerning thing. And it can lead to foundation issues, things like that. Some of you know what that looks like when you see those cracks show up around the foundation. If you've got those problems, you want someone to fix those problems. That's what my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia can do for you. They can absolutely step up and take care of you on that. They got 2 full-time engineers on staff. Sometimes this is just a simple fix. Other times it's a little bit more substantial. Well, when it is, you want smart people doing it. As I said before, 2 full-time engineers on staff. ESOG is also a proud partner of UGA, which makes them fun to do business with. And my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia have truly been friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily for a long time. They're also very easy to get in touch with. Simply dial 678 678-ESOG now. That's right, very easy number. Call 678-ESOG now for all your foundation and waterproofing needs. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, we'll talk to Connor Riley coming up in just a moment. Some very good stuff about to go down with him. He had a good piece up at DawgNation.com looking at kind of what the next few months are going to be for Georgia. This is obviously news still ongoing. Final pieces left for that 2021 recruiting cycle, looking to hire a defensive backs coach. You got a lot of stuff on the horizon for UGA. Connor will chat about that with us here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, it's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered by Marco's Pizza. And I don't know if you're like me, but this time of year, I always think it's kind of interesting because it always takes me a minute to go from the end of the one recruiting cycle to the true start of the new cycle. I'm always kind of interested to kind of find out, well, when does that truly begin? When does the true momentum for new recruiting actually start? Because sometimes when you hear about a player from a future year's class, it can kind of seem like a long way away or something like that. But I would say that whenever that is normally, we have definitely kind of crossed over that threshold now. And we are, even though there's still maybe a little bit of hay to put in the barn for the class of 2021 before February rolls around, we are now definitely in the mix here for 2022 recruiting momentum. We talked about that yesterday when it comes to Emmanuel Henderson. Another guy we got to talk about today, big-time defensive line prospect, probably a defensive end at Georgia. Mikael Henderson, very impressive four-star prospect from down in the Columbus area. He lets us know on Twitter that he is also getting ready to make a March decision coming up on March 15th for Mikael Williams. Good-looking defensive line prospect. I want to encourage you to go to DawgNation.com, read the story that Jeff Sintel has with Williams there about his future and the choices that he's going to make and kind of what he's looking for from that. He had an interesting comment about how Georgia got more on his radar after he had a chance to attend a game during the 2019 season to see the atmosphere around Sanford Stadium, kind of fell in love with UGA because of that. So maybe Georgia now on his radar more. And as far as what Williams is looking for from his college experience, I thought this was really interesting. Let me show you this quote, and I want you to read the full story at DawgNation. But this quote in particular from Williams I thought was pretty good. He says, "I want to be able to go in there, wherever there is, at his school of choice and play early. Not necessarily play all the time early, but get on the field. Do you know what I mean? Be successful. I'm actually looking for a coach that's going to develop me and actually prepare me for the next level, which is the NFL." I think this is really good from Williams because I do think this is very honest about his own recruitment, but also a pretty good snapshot of the way that most recruits feel. Recruits, like all of us, can be a little bit impatient. They want some sort of role right away. I think Kirby Smart's been pretty good about that. Sometimes we feel like maybe there's too much rotating going on at Georgia, but the byproduct of that is there's a chance for everybody, at least almost everybody, to feel like they have some sort of role, some sort of opportunity. And then beyond that, you love it when Williams says, my next phase, I believe, is the NFL. I want a coach that kind of gets me ready for that. I think quietly that's been really going on in a very interesting way at Georgia, where you're about to see over the course of the next couple of years some front seven guys from Georgia, linebackers, defensive linemen, which is obviously a bit more irrelevant for Williams, who themselves are about to have some NFL draft success. In Georgia, who's been doing some major league recruiting work year after year after year, some of that now is about to really show up on the NFL draft radar in a couple of years. The work that Trey Scott's done as a recruiter along the defensive line, at one point in time, maybe a vulnerability for Georgia, maybe in an area in which needed improvement. I don't know that you say that much anymore, given what Trayvon Walker can be for the Georgia program, what Jalen Carter appears to be on his way to doing, obviously what Jordan Davis is going to do one more year in a Georgia uniform. Obviously, as you start thinking about Williams making that choice coming up, a month and a half from now or so, the hope that you have as a Georgia fan is that Williams notices some of the good things that's going on with Georgia's defensive line as this truly becomes a program that can be known for that position group as much as anything else. It's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza, America's most beloved pizza. Real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. Good pizza at a great price. Really good chance to take advantage of that right now. How about a large specialty pizza and a large two-topping pizza for just $23.99. That's right, you get them both together. Large specialty pizza, large two-topping pizza, just $23.99. at Marco's Pizza right now. A couple of ways for you to get in touch. You can go to marcos.com, find out about all the options available to you, and place your order. Or if you haven't downloaded the Marco's app, that's my invitation for you to do that there as well. Marco's Pizza delivering around the doghouse to us here today. There is a bunch of stuff around the SEC, and we're going to cover a lot of that before we're done. A lot of that's Tennessee coaching search related. Some of this is kind of getting interesting there. There's, maybe some news, at least if you want to do like an algebraic equation here, maybe some news involving a Georgia assistant we're going to touch on before we're done here today. So we're very busy in the time that we have left. But before that, on everything going on around Georgia football, let's get ready to talk to our buddy Connor Riley. Good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And we'll say hello to Connor Riley here. Looking forward to talking some Georgia football with him. There's been a bunch going on around the program. It always seems like that December, January time as coaching carousel spin, recruiting stuff continues. It always seems like it's a pretty busy time. This year, really no different for Georgia. I'll invite you to check out Connor's piece up at DawgNation.com right now, where he talks a little bit more about, what's going to be next for Georgia and kind of what's on the way here. And, Connor, we got, coaches still to hire for UGA, a little bit of 2021 recruiting left over. As I said before you join us, it seems like 2022 is kind of kicking into high gear here. There's actually a lot going on around Georgia at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. Even in the last 20 minutes, Indiana officially announces the hiring of Charlton Warren as the new defensive coordinator there. Story will be posted shortly on DawgNation about that. But, yeah, it's a busy time, and it's interesting. Traditionally, Georgia has been a team that has done most of its recruiting work late in the cycle. I believe this past December they only had 2 commitments from the start of December, and they could potentially get 3 to close out the class if they land Terry and Arnold. They had 10 in the 2020 cycle, so it looks like maybe Georgia is sort of in line with what Ohio State and Clemson have done in recent years, doing a little bit more of the work early on in this recruiting cycle.
And obviously I'm going to talk a little bit about Terry and Arnold before we're done today, and I won't pretend to have the inside track on where he lands, but I continue to believe that Georgia is in this just as much as anybody else, if for no other reason. How much more room does Alabama even have left? They've signed what seems like 100 guys. Florida has also had change over with its defensive backs coaches. We're going to talk about that before we're done here today. I don't know that makes Georgia the leader for Arnold. I really can't say that I know that one way or another, but you better believe I'm tuned in when you head towards next Wednesday. You better believe that I am of the belief that Georgia has a real shot there.
Yeah, as long as Kirby Smart is still the head coach of Georgia, the Bulldogs are going to have a chance at landing Terry and Arnold. Smart had taken a very involved recruitment in Arnold in developing a relationship with him. Smart works heavily with defensive backs, so I think it's important to develop a relationship there. And again, talking to Jeff Sentell, of the 5-10 guys that Georgia could have landed in this cycle, I think of all the prospects, even the ones they didn't necessarily land, Arnold would fall in that top 10 of the possible prospects that Georgia could add to this class. He's a playmaking safety, and reality is Georgia doesn't really have a whole lot of those right now. I know Lewis Seen has done some nice things. Christopher Smith really played well in that Peach Bowl win over Cincinnati, but Terry and Arnold is something that Georgia doesn't have right now, and he's got an opportunity to come in and play early next year, I think, just given some of the turnover that you've seen in this secondary this offseason.
And as we've said before, I think the hiring of a defensive backs coach is really important here, but I don't know that it's all that important related to Arnold's recruitment, because we've now made this well documented that Arnold has felt close to Kirby Smart. Not that he didn't feel close to Charlton Warren, but he has felt particularly close with Kirby Smart. So the hiring of a defensive backs coach is a crucial issue for Georgia, but it's really, to me, a separate lane from the Terry and Arnold conversation. There's a very good chance that Arnold already knows who Georgia's going to hire. We don't know yet. So I don't know that the rush to hire a defensive backs coach is necessarily related to Arnold, and therefore I don't know there's much of a rush here at all. I think it's more about due diligence to make sure you get the right guy. Georgia, I believe, and I think you and I have talked about this, I believe needs an instructor there, someone who's going to get this young crop ready to play. Georgia has plenty of talent, whether Arnold comes or not. It'd be great if he did, but Georgia's got the talent, but it's inexperience. And for Georgia to be as good as it can be next year, you've got to get those guys ready to play. So the defensive backs coach hire is important, and for one of the rare times in DawgNation Daily history, I'm going to say for a reason other than recruiting.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about some of the past coaching hires and the time it took for those to happen. Charlton Warren, it took him roughly 6 weeks for Georgia to finally land on him as the defensive backs coach when he got hired in 2019. But I think you look at another hiring in that very same cycle. Georgia waited only 4 days from Jim Chaney leaving, left on a Tuesday night, to hiring and announcing James Coley as the new offensive coordinator at Georgia. And I think Kirby is right and correct in saying we're going to go out and find the best possible candidate for this job, turn over all the stones, even if that means some uncertainty with this major recruit that we are still out there recruiting. Because the reality is, as important as Terry Arnold is, and we've well established how much he could bring to this Georgia team potentially, this secondary hire isn't just for Arnold. It's for the entire Georgia secondary. It's for the entire Georgia defense. And I think given right now that secondary figures to be either weakness 1 or weakness 1A, depending on how you feel about the offensive line, it's a really important hire that Georgia goes out and makes and sort of solidifies that defensive back group, because whoever takes this job, they're going to have a ton of pressure on them right away in 2021.
What else is on your radar? I know you wrote about this a little bit. For folks who haven't had a chance to read your full story yet, what else is still out there for Georgia that you're curious about?
Yeah, well, you touched on the 2022 recruiting a little bit. Michael Williams, Christian Miller, another 4-star defensive tackle. He is someone who plays at Cedar Grove right now. He announced, I believe, he's going to commit April 4th. And then obviously Emmanuel Henderson, who you touched on yesterday, a couple of Georgia's top targets in this recruiting cycle.
Can I stop you for 1 second before you move past that? Why are all these guys – because I said this yesterday. Henderson announcing so early does not really sound like great news to me, because it feels like Alabama just has so much recruiting momentum at the moment. But why are all these guys accelerating their process? At least that's what it seems to me. I mean, Jeff wrote about Williams that he initially was planning on waiting way, way later, and now he's an early announcement. Why do you think these guys are pulling the trigger so fast?
So there's an important date to know, April 15th, because that is the day that the NCAA's dead period is set to end, which, if that ends, allows kids to go out and take visits again. However, and this is just reckless speculation, sound the alarms and whatnot to make it clear, I think they're going to extend the dead period a little bit longer beyond that. I still don't think we're going to need to be where we are as a country to allow kids to travel across the country and visit these schools and visit these places. So,
although they may be able to eat at a restaurant in L.A., Washington, D.C., Detroit, New York City.
Yeah, so with that in mind, I think a couple of these guys know, okay, the uncertainty with visits and the status of that is still going to exist and continue. So if I have a pretty good idea of where I want to go play, whether it be Henderson going to Alabama or Williams going to Georgia, I think, why wait? Why not sort of commit to a program, start getting that? And then if visits open up on the back end, there's no penalty for taking visits. I know Clemson has their sort of rule, if you're a committed prospect, you don't take visits elsewhere, but you saw, I think that hurt them in this last cycle with Corey Foreman, so to speak. So, there's no real penalty if you committed to a school and you know where you want to go. And then, hey, if you have a wandering eye and there's a visit on the back end that you want to take, because those are allowed again, I don't think there's any penalty or harm for doing that.
I always think it's kind of interesting this time of year, and I mentioned this a moment ago, where it's hard to know like when we actually kind of turn the page and like the new recruiting cycle begins, but we're in it now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a little bit left to do for 2021, but we're in the 2022 cycle now.
Yeah.
We're talking 2022 guys. These are the present tense, current, recruits of the moment. We are in that cycle now.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see sort of next year. I'm assuming by next December we're taking visits again. What sort of impact that has on recruitments and guys announcing earlier, I believe the stat I read the other day of like the ESPN 300, and ESPN obviously not the best well-known source for recruiting, but 260 in the 2020 cycle, 260 of the top 300 prospects were committed. And signed, I should say, by the early signing period. This year, 265, so not a great real increase there despite the lack of visits. So we'll sort of see with this 2021 sort of the impact of late visits again and what that might potentially mean for some of these prospects and recruits. But to your point, I think once you turn the page, really get past those all-star games, the All-American Bowl in Orlando and San Antonio, and the Under Armour game in Orlando, once you get past that, for me, it sort of is turning the page to 2022 and focusing and familiarizing yourself with some of those big names in that class.
Let me mention something else that I believe you wrote about, if my memory is correct here, and I think this is something we ought to be paying attention to. The SEC still has not announced its schedule for the upcoming fall season, and I was listening to the radio this morning in Birmingham. They were saying that could actually come anytime over the course of the next couple of weeks. It seems like we're getting close to hearing that. To me, this is not a rubber stamp. This is one of those things that I'm actually pretty interested to see what the SEC does announce from a schedule standpoint when it does announce it. Now, listen, we saw last year that things can change, and the league will pivot if it needs to and make a completely different announcement. But this is not like a what's the word I'm looking for? this is not just some sort of like mundane step in the process here. What the schedule that the SEC announces when it does announce one is going to mean something.
Yeah, and one of the important things in lessons of 2020 is to not, I think for me, to not be so rigid, not be so stuck in your ways, to have flexibility, to be able to adapt and sort of change with that. And the SEC is going to be presented sort of an opportunity here. I do think they go back to an 8-game schedule, but I also think you're going to see going forward sort of them turn the schedule announcement into a television event. Now, I don't think they're going to announce it in August like they did this season. I think they're going to want to give more people some time out there to plan and make the necessary preparations that come with attending an SEC football game and also planning a wedding around an SEC football game. I will tell you, I have a friend who has a wedding on September 19th, which is a Sunday, which will almost certainly be the day after Georgia's first SEC game that season. So it's interesting. I think they've got a chance to do some interesting stuff here. We do know the dates of 4 of Georgia's games next year. Clemson on September 4th in Charlotte. UAB in Athens that next Saturday, the 11th. Charleston Southern at home on the 20th. And Georgia Tech on the 27th. If I had to bet, I'd put a big chunk of money on that game being played in Atlanta, just given how things sort of worked out in 2020.
And you can also assume that Georgia-Florida is going to be October 30th, but there's a reason we're not doing Gator Hater Countdown right now.
Yes.
There's I mean, just to be completely...
There's just not a date.
Yeah, completely inside on this, that while I am about 90% certain that game takes place October 30th, I'm not so certain that I want to start counting down to it yet.
Right, and the one thing is that yes, the SEC did change things around, but some of those changes were for the better, and I think you might continue to see that next season. For example, I mean, you mentioned Gator Hater. Why have that game on the 30th instead of why not make that the last SEC game or, depending on what Florida's schedule is, the next to last SEC game for Georgia and Florida, just to sort of make that a de facto SEC East championship game and build that thing into an even bigger prospect there.
So that's an interesting idea. Here's the one pushback I'll give you on that is that baseball has tried to do this with backloading a lot of its division games. But, the more and more you have wild cards, the less and less those division games matter as much. And a lot of times divisions get decided early, and therefore the late game, Braves going on the road to take on the Mets or something like that ends up being play out the string more so than what it's supposed to be, which is to decide something. That's the last thing you want to do is move Georgia-Florida back and not have a chance to have it be what it has. I mean, really, that has worked out very well at the date that it is to be the deciding game for the SEC East, or at least a very, very big – it's not been a clinching game for Georgia necessarily all that much, but it's been a deciding game plenty of times when it comes to the SEC East. So I would say the date that game has, in terms of making it feel like a big game, I would say it falls at a pretty good time on the Georgia schedule.
Yeah, if you're moving Georgia-Florida back, you are turning it into a boom or bust type game where if Georgia and Florida take care of business, great, that is an SEC East decider. But you look this past year, say Florida loses to LSU a little bit earlier, that takes, I think, a bit of the sting out of that game there. So what the SEC ultimately decides to do, I'll be really interested in see how they've adapted from 2020 and what that means for both the 2021 schedule and then schedules beyond that going forward. But I will, if I can make one surefire lock of the week prediction, it's going to be a television event. They are going to say, like a week before, hey, we're going to announce the schedule on date X. Yeah. And everyone's going to tune in. Everyone's going to have their pre-writes. I'm sure DawgNation will have a cover 4 ready to go. Sure. We're breaking down the schedule announcement live as it happens.
I loved what they did in the summertime. That was a ton of fun for me.
Instant reactions, a ton of information out there.
I really enjoyed that, so I wouldn't have any problem if they did that again. Let me shift gears here and talk about a couple of other things for a moment. You wrote about McCole Hardman getting back to the Super Bowl again, and I talked about this in the show yesterday, a similar angle to something you took with at your piece at DawgNation.com. Hardman had like 500 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns for Georgia in 2018. That's been a pretty good year by Georgia standards. He was obviously a fun player to watch, and that's continued for him in the NFL. I think it's an interesting perspective on how good Georgia probably needs to be offensively this year, that you need multiples of players to play as well as McCole Hardman did in 2018, and you probably need 1 or 2 guys to be many multiples of what Hardman was. Yeah. I mean, Devontae Smith, crazy year. Before that, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase at LSU in 2019, crazy year. The last 3 SEC champions, 2 of which won the title, 1 of which played for the title. The last 3 SEC champions have averaged more than 45 points a game. The last 2 have averaged more than 48. Georgia won the SEC in 2017 by averaging 35 points a game. For Georgia to be a true championship contender this upcoming season, I believe, unfortunately, it means you need a lot of guys in your wide receiving core playing as well as McCole Hardman did in 2018.
Yeah, and Georgia doesn't necessarily have a lot of proven entities, but they do have guys that have shown capabilities and promise and potential there. Karius Jackson, he had, I think, 36 catches, 514 yards, 3 touchdowns. If he can replicate that next season, fantastic. George Pickens, you expect him to build on what he did this season. Jermaine Burton, I think 24, 25 catches for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. You hope that he builds on that going forward. And then the guy sort of compared to Mecole a little bit just in terms of the raw speed, which Georgia did not have in 2019 and really with Smith wasn't able to really use it a whole lot in 2020, is Arian Smith. What does he do? He had only 2 catches this year. One of them went for 31 yards and a touchdown, the other one for 55 yards. And, the most interesting thing to me about Mecole was you saw in that game, made an early mistake, muffing a punt return, led directly to 6 points for Buffalo. Very next drive, catches a short little screen pass and just straight up beats his guys to the end zone. And then the drive after that takes a 50-yard end around and sets Kansas City up for another touchdown. Speed, it offers explosive plays, and those explosive plays allow you to make up for so many different things. We have to see Georgia continue to make those, and just pure speed that Hardman had, and I think Smith has as well. And there's a reason I think you saw Georgia go after a guy like Jimmy Horn at the end of the 2021 cycle, who had similar type speed. Is just you cannot have enough of those guys. Jalen Waddle, I thought, yes, Devontae Smith, I think, had the better numbers in that game against Georgia, but Waddle's speed was such a clear X factor in that game that Georgia just didn't have anyone that could keep up with him. And had he played out the full season, you wonder what that ultimately does for Devontae Smith.
I think you're right about all of that. I do think the speed is crucial. It's one of the reasons why, when Smith got a chance to play, Arian Smith, there was that immediate wow factor of, oh my gosh, this is so it's weird. Georgia's got a lot of really good players on the offense, but I don't know that very many of them would have speed as their number one calling card. And that's not saying that in a way to disparage them. There's a wide array of potential skills, and other guys have the knob on strength, physicality, athleticism maybe turned up a little higher, whereas the speed may be turned down a notch, and you can kind of pay attention to that yourself. But when you see Smith, you realize, man, that is McCole Hardman type speed, and it's just so easy to use it. Yeah, it's just so easy to use it. But to kind of finish this part of the conversation off, I want you to comment on what I was saying before, is that when you really look at how did Alabama against an SEC-only schedule plus a college football playoff get to 48 points a game, when you see the individual statistical performances that made that possible. LSU, kind of the same thing the year before. 2018 Alabama, don't discount how good they were offensively as well. When you see the statistical individual performances that made that possible, it's just really important on this show, I think, that we don't sugarcoat just how significant the challenge awaiting Georgia to be anywhere near that good offensively is for next season. This is not just roll the ball out there and go out there and bask in the glory of that. You got to really work to be anywhere close to that good offensively.
Right. Yeah, that 2018 Alabama offense had 4 first-round receivers in Ruggs, Judy, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle. That 2019 LSU offense had at least 2 in Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, and possibly a third in Terrence Marshall, depending on where he goes and how he does in the draft process this year. And then this past year with Alabama, they had Waddle and they had Smith as well. So, and then not to mention Najee Harris as a running back, who's a pretty darn good receiving option as well there for the Crimson Tide. So the reality is, you look at recent college football, yes, having quarterback play is important, but this is sort of something that's really opened my eyes these last couple of seasons is you need great play out of your wide receivers if you're going to win a national title. Clemson had that in 2018. I don't necessarily know if they've had that in 2019 and 2020. You look at a team like Ohio State, they've gotten better, and I think part of the reason obviously is Justin Fields, but you look at the development of a guy like Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, as well as how they've recruited at that position. I think Georgia is starting to get there, but they need guys to take that leap forward and be, they need George Pickens to actually be the, no doubt about it, best receiver in America so that he is a first-round draft pick next year. They need Jermaine Burton, Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemary, Jack Saint to sort of take those leaps forward.
I want to finish with a topic, and I apologize if this sounds like a condescending question, but I just don't know. Are you old enough to remember Matthew Stafford as Georgia's quarterback?
No. So yes, I am old enough. I was aware of it. I remember the Sugar Bowl win. I remember that 2008 season. But as far as the investment level that I have now, no, it does not register with me.
So I'm going to say something, and Georgia fans who are about my age, I'd love to have you tell me if you think I'm off base on this, but I'm a little bit surprised at how much of a DGD beloved figure Stafford is amongst Georgia fans, because I would suggest that, not to say that anybody criticized him or didn't like him or anything like that, but the 2008 season at Georgia left a bad taste in some Georgia fans' minds because it was preseason number 1. It was a team that didn't live up to the hype, and there was just kind of this, well, you've got, former number 1 quarterback, you've got all this, but they're not really living up to it in the field. Fairly unfairly, that's kind of my memory of that some Georgia fans were just kind of, this team didn't do very much. Stafford's a Texas guy. He came to Georgia thinking about the NFL. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's some of the memory I have of some of the conversation in kind of a pre-social media world that kind of existed around him now. And yet, since he's been in the NFL, I would say that, the Georgia fans I hear from still really love following Matthew Stafford. Stafford's been well connected to Georgia, I think, and, kind of some good vibes around there, even though he is obviously not from this state. And yet, in his NFL career, there hasn't really been that big winning moment for him yet. I'm really curious if a new team provides him that chance to kind of go out a winner. I mean, what are the chances you think that happens for Stafford?
I think time heals all wounds, and yes, you are correct. And I think looking back in that 2008 season, Georgia didn't live up to expectations. But I think it's maybe a little unfair to put that all on Stafford in that season there. And obviously that just comes with being the quarterback and being the first-round draft pick. I think in recent years you see how Joe Burrow, even Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones have played this past season. Stafford, as good as he was in 2008, he was not that. So, that I think clouds some of the judgment there, but he was in an awful situation in Detroit for the past decade. And speaking as a New England Patriots fan, when I saw that he was, going to request a trade and part ways with the Lions, I would be thrilled if Matt Stafford was my quarterback next year. Unfortunately, I learned that Matt Patricia, who was his former head coach in Detroit, is now also an assistant in New England once again. So, and I think, look, and we don't need to share with the DawgNation audience here, but I am not a fan of Matt Patricia.
Sure, you're right.
So I absolutely think if he goes to the right system in the right place, and the two biggest names that really come to mind for me right now are the Indianapolis Colts and the San Francisco 49ers. I think if he goes to either of those teams, he's already working with the best head coach he will have ever worked with. San Francisco played for a Super Bowl last year. Indianapolis took the Bills to the mat with 40-year-old Phil Rivers as their quarterback this year. I think Stafford is much better at this current point in time than Rivers is. So I think there's a ton of potential. I think he's still got some gas left in the tank. His 2019 season, through like 8 games, he was a legitimate MVP candidate, and then he just happened to get hurt there. So I think he's someone who, and really he earned a lot of people's respect because in his time at Detroit, because he never had the most talented teams. Pretty clearly didn't have a great coaching staff and support system around him, but he always sort of went out there, that sort of gunslinger mentality, sort of Brett Favre-ish, although Favre obviously won early in his career, but he said, hey, we don't have a lot of talent, but I'm going to get out there, I'm going to take my hits, and I'm going to try and play through as much pain as I can and try and lead this team to a victory.
I'm really curious about this phase of Stafford's career because he's been a very good player. I don't know him personally, but I get the sense he's a good guy, but he hasn't really had that winning opportunity yet.
Right.
This is his chance to kind of select a team and maybe put himself in a position to win, and we see this with a lot of folks in sports, whether it's like Dirk Nowitzki, guys like that. You find a way to win late in your career, changes everything about your legacy.
Yeah, Dirk's a great example there because before the 2011 NBA Finals, he was labeled as soft and underachiever, disappointment. And now looking back on him, he's one of the most revered players of the past 20 years in the NBA. So it's a big opportunity here for Matthew Stafford. And you look at what Tom Brady did. Tom Brady, was not great in New England in 2019, went to the right place, was sort of rejuvenated, I think, through 40 touchdowns in the regular season this year, and is going to go play for his 7th Super Bowl in 2 weeks. So if Stafford gets in the right situation where the pieces are around him, I think he is a potential difference maker and can help a team like the Colts or the 49ers either get to the Super Bowl, potentially get over the top there with the quarterback issues that they've had in recent seasons. So I'm rooting for him.
Connor, terrific stuff. Thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
By the way, I think as always, it was a pleasure is becoming a little bit of a catchphrase. I had somebody mention that to me on Twitter the other day, so apparently folks are starting to catch on with that, kind of like some of the accidental catchphrases that I've kind of landed on over the years. But really good stuff from Connor Riley. Very interesting stuff. Make sure you read everything that he's writing there at DawgNation.com. I'd certainly appreciate that. Let me also say this. We're heading towards the big game in a couple of weeks. Time to get your Super Bowl bets down with my friends at MyBookie. You know, live action player prop stuff. Super Bowl is the most bet on sporting event in America each and every year. It's what makes the big game so much fun, and there's no better place to catch in with that than my friends at MyBookie. And if you haven't signed up, my encouragement is that you do that. Take advantage of the big player perks. That's what MyBookie's known for, the best in the industry. So simply find MyBookie online. Just type it into your browser, MyBookie. The internet will do the work for you. Then after that, use the promo code DawgNation. You can get up to a 50% signing bonus. That means you put $500 in your account, they're going to put $250 right there on top of it. You put $1,000 in your account, they're going to give you $500 on top of it. You already know this, but I'll tell you anyway. That means you're a winner before you even make your first bet. You've already got more money in your account than you started with. Then at MyBookie, after that, you just play, you win, you get paid. No better way to enjoy the big game here coming up in a couple of weeks than with some great betting action with my friends at MyBookie. So make sure you find them online today. MyBookie online, that's what you type into your browser, MyBookie, and then use the promo code DawgNation. All right, a lot to get to here when it comes to an SEC through. Let's do Tennessee coaching rumors here first. So the Minneapolis Star-Tribune has a report out that P.J. Fleck of Row the Boat fame is not interested in the Tennessee job. I'm always very skeptical when you've got hometown, media source quoting hometown coach saying, listen, I'm not a candidate for this job. That always seems to me a little bit self-serving. I don't know that Fleck was truly on Tennessee's radar as much. It's one thing to go be rah-rah guy up there and, go for country. It's another thing to kind of come down here in the SEC where it's full contact recruiting, people throwing elbows, things like that. That's a good way to get in a hole in your boat when you come down here. So I don't know that Tennessee cared anything about P.J. Fleck, but Fleck has apparently said he plans on staying there at Minnesota. You got an interesting report from Chris Lowe mentioning the possibility of three names. You've got Sonny Dykes. You've got Tony Elliott, the Clemson offensive coordinator we talked about yesterday. And then he said the possibility of the home run hire would be James Franklin from Penn State. Obviously, things are kind of weird at Penn State right now, so maybe a better opportunity to get a coach away from State College than you might have thought. They were not very good last year. I like flight trackers. My favorite thing about message board culture is the private plane tracking that goes on, especially from these SEC towns where there are not that many flights leaving from time to time. I guess there was some flight tracker stuff yesterday, if I saw this correctly, of a plane leaving from Knoxville to go to to go to State College, Pennsylvania. I believe this is real. So much of the stuff on the internet around all this ends up being fake, but I believe this was real. But listen, we have no way of knowing what that was really about. Was it, in fact, it's probably to be assumed it was not related to, Tennessee going to bring James Franklin back to the Volunteer State, a state he once coached in when it comes to Vanderbilt. It reminds me of what a year ago when the flight tracker stuff around UGA saw a plane leaving Athens to go to Fort Collins, Colorado, and it seemed, well, that just must mean that that's Mike Bobo coming back here to be Georgia's offensive coordinator. Maybe Bobo was on that plane, I don't know, but obviously it ended up not kind of working out that way around Georgia. So I'm a huge fan of those who are good at kind of like reading the flight tracker stuff. I guess the Tennessee thing was also seen, the plane was also seen at a Peachtree DeKalb airport as well. There'd been some rumors they were doing some interviewing around there too. It was also kind of interesting that there was a fake account yesterday that did a Lane Kiffin rumor, like Kiffin's coming back home, big Photoshop type thing, big edit, and Tennessee people were obviously reacting to it, SEC people were reacting to it. Somebody mentioned Lane Kiffin, said, boy, Lane Kiffin's laughing about all of this, and then Lane Kiffin comes on Twitter and says, yeah, boy, I am laughing about all of this. I'm sorry. I think all of this is just really, really strange. I mean, would you want your wife joking around on Facebook with her high school boyfriend every single day? Like, something about that is just kind of weird. The fact that Kiffin has a job in the SEC, but seems to just revel in the attention that he gets from Vols fans. Clearly a better job than Ole Miss. No one would deny that. If I'm an Ole Miss person, I'm kind of like, maybe you focus on the job that you have. Why don't you try to, do some winning here. See if you can find a defense that can stop one team one time. Can we work on some of that kind of stuff in Oxford, Mississippi before you go flirting with a bunch of Tennessee fans on Twitter all the time? There's an aspect of Kiffin's social media behavior that I've always found very, very weird. People seem to love it. He gets a free pass for virtually everything that goes on with him. But some of that kind of stuff is just really, really strange. Speaking of Tennessee, a couple of other things here, and we'll kind of do this quick. So, big name apparently staying, big name reportedly leaving. Darnell Wright, former 5-star offensive line signee, who had been rumored to be on the move. Wright put out on social media that he is staying in Knoxville. So, if you remember back from him as a recruit, he was a little mercurial back then too. So all we can go on is what he's saying publicly here, that Darnell Wright, the former 5-star offensive tackle, is not leaving Tennessee. But J.J. Peterson, a big recruiting win for the Vols when they got it out of, Colquitt County, I think Peterson was at. Big recruiting win there at the time. Looks like Matt Zenitz from AL.com is reporting that Peterson's going into the transfer portal. So add Peterson to the list of pretty high-profile names who are on their way out of that program. I also wanted to mention this, and listen, I don't know if new Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks is paying attention to a DawgNation Daily presented by ESOG today or not, but for all the bad stuff coming out of Tennessee, this actually might be a pretty good thing coming out of Tennessee. If you're watching on video, I'll show this to you, and if you're listening radio podcast, I'll have to explain it to you, but coming up in May, they are going to turn Neyland Stadium into what's called a Topgolf Live. I hate to give free plug for Topgolf here, but this is interesting enough that I will do it. So if you've ever been to Topgolf, you know what it is. It's a kind of a cool spot, kind of like a souped up driving range type experience. Well, they're going to set this thing up at Neyland Stadium. Apparently a few other stadiums as well. It's just Neyland Stadium is the one that I happen to see on Twitter about this. They're going to do this. It's going to be May 20th through the 23rd there. We've seen recruits at Sanford Stadium kind of hit from the west end zone bridge area, hit golf balls into the stadium. I've said before, it's like the world's coolest Topgolf. We got to get one of these at UGA. Like I said before, I'm not going to give Topgolf too much free airtime here, but people like Topgolf. It'd be a ton of fun. A kind of live experience of a Topgolf type thing. I mean, Sanford Stadium is the perfect place to do something like this. Hitting from the west end zone towards the east end zone, that'd be amazing. What a cool setup that'd be. So I'll give Tennessee a little credit for that. That looks like a pretty fun thing all the way around. A couple other stories I want to touch on very, very fast here. It does look like LSU has found its new defensive coordinator. It's Devontae Jones, most recently defensive backs coach with the Minnesota Vikings. Oregon has also hired a defensive coordinator recently as well. So by process of elimination, I guess that means for now, Glenn Schumann is set to stay at Georgia. Schumann had been a rumored candidate for Oregon, been a rumored candidate for LSU. And frankly, the longer the LSU thing kind of dragged on, the more I started to wonder, well, do they eventually arrive at Schumann just by process of elimination? Well, now you can kind of check that box off. Schumann is still a relatively young coach. He is by no means behind schedule on getting the big promotion or anything like that. He wasn't a coach at all until, Kirby Smart hired him. He'd only been kind of a quality control analyst working his way up. So, it's certainly not time for, I would say, Schumann to be impatient. Yeah, but everybody wants to advance in their career. So Schumann is, I would say, on the doorstep in the next couple of years towards getting the big advancement. If who knows, Dan Lanning becomes a head coach. Maybe Schumann gets that at UGA. But for now, it looks like two of the places that he could have gone, he is not going to be going to. So maybe the hire of Devontae Jones, when it becomes official, kind of closes the door on Glenn Schumann going anywhere for right now. Then finally, there's this related to our SEC through. Florida has hired a defensive backs coach, or I guess he's going to be cornerbacks coach. Wesley McGriff was recently hired to be the safeties coach there. They split those duties up. It's Jules Monitor. Monitor was actually an analyst at Georgia, I think, back in 2019, and most recently South Florida defensive backs coach. So Florida has made a pretty key hire here. And as I said before, I don't really think that the absence of defensive backs coaching hire at Georgia probably impacts Terry and Arnold's recruitment all that much. We've explained the reasons why. It could be that Arnold knows who Georgia's about to hire. It's just that we don't know that. So I'm not really all that worried about the arms race between Georgia and Florida to hire cornerbacks coach here, defensive backs coaches here. Not too worried about that, but it is interesting to note that Florida, after choosing to move on from Torian Gray and Ron English a season ago, has now made both of its defensive backs coaching hires, and we'll wait to see if Georgia's able to do the same thing. We'll make that your SEC through. And as we wrap up here, we'll give a shout-out to the Lady Dogs. Another fun win for them last night, this time in essentially buzzer-beating walk-off fashion. This team is a ton of fun to watch right now. I am definitely hopping on the Lady Dogs bandwagon after what has been a pretty good start to the season there for Georgia women's basketball. So great to see that. Good shout-out all the way around there. A lot of fun, and congratulations to Joni Taylor's club for finding a way to get themselves another win. Let me also say this, and I said this off the top of the program. I want to be very careful here not to step on my own brand, but with our golden shoe at the end of the show, we like to give out, the award for someone who sends kind of a it's supposed to be like someone who, shows their hatred for Florida, but it's kind of turned into who sends the funniest Photoshop edit. I got a good one today of someone, Thomas Delaney. It's a picture of Philip Fulmer holding up the McDonald's bag. If you read the trophy down here, it says, in recognition for 25 years of service, the Golden Arch, Champions of Life. This is really funny for Thomas Delaney. So, Thomas, it's not Florida, but it is funny. You are the Golden Shoe winner today. We'll see all of you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. Back again tomorrow. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Appreciate you being here today. We will take all of your comments, or at least as many as we can kind of get through here over the course of the next few minutes. I'm going to start on YouTube because I'm pretty sure I started on Facebook yesterday. And some of you were saying that you didn't think the mic looked too comfortable yesterday. I feel like it looks way better today. Hopefully you feel like it does. I'm going to get a new chair eventually. Yesterday, the issue with the show was not the microphone. It's like I wish I could show you. There are 10,000 cords behind this desk. And when they get tangled up in front of my chair, I can't move the chair. And that's really frustrating. So that's really what was going on more yesterday. But I feel like the new microphone's working out great. I like it because it gives me a chance to sit up a little taller. I'm not hunched down like this, which is, frankly uncomfortable after a while. So I feel like I'm sitting high in the saddle here and having a good time. And hopefully it's working out well for everybody. Hopefully it is anyway. Richard Dees asked a good question. I know Arnold is a big basketball player. Has Tom Crean been a part of his recruitment? That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. That's a very good question. Jacob Thompson says I should do a Mike Leach-style bandwagon video for the Lady Dogs. I'm guessing that given how poorly that worked out for Leach at Mississippi State, Joni Taylor might not want me to do that. I'm guessing that she might not want to follow in the footsteps of what happened for Leach there at Mississippi State, but I am definitely on that bandwagon. That's been a pretty fun team. G. Grace Bama Boy says, I'm back. Who's arguing today? I remember when Fred Gibson played both basketball and football at Georgia, and Gibson had a big game for Georgia on the road at Florida. Do y'all remember that? Gibson was actually a pretty good player. Larry Brown was also a double duty guy. Who else has been double duty? I mean, Georgia's had like Chris Carpenter playing football and baseball. They probably had more football, baseballs over the years. But I can remember Larry Brown, Fred Gibson were double duty football, basketball. Is there anybody else that I'm not thinking of that was the double duty on both? Tristan West says, what does the Muschamp buyout mean for us? Does he become our defensive backs coach, a defensive analyst, or take another defensive coordinator job elsewhere? So I obviously can only speculate about this. I know Mike wrote about that. I speculated last week that a possible reason for why Muschamp in Georgia wanted to be known that he wasn't working at Georgia was related to the buyout stuff. I mean, frankly, people say, well, money never matters in college football because we've seen coaches fired and things like that. But listen, I think pretty quietly there's an interesting trend going on in the sport where you do see money matter a little more. Michigan didn't fire Jim Harbaugh, but they reduced his salary like 50%. Now he has incentives that he can make it back, but money mattered enough at a place like Michigan that they kept Harbaugh with a reduced salary. Tennessee has gone through a pretty odd process here to try to avoid paying some or all of the buyout it was going to owe to Jeremy Pruitt. So you see some examples around college football where money has kind of mattered. So being really careful if you're Will Muschamp to make sure you didn't give South Carolina any reason to kind of come after some of your buyout, that kind of makes a little bit of sense to me. I won't pretend to know if that was the reason why there was the hard pushback last week against Muschamp working there, but I would say that's potentially a reason why it could have happened. I would say that. And then, to add to that, I'm big of the belief that if you feel like you can interview for head coaching jobs again, you don't voluntarily go and become a position coach because you've just moved yourself down to a different job category. Now, Matt Luke last year when he made the decision, it could be that he felt like that he was going to have to work his way back up into that head coaching situation. Who knows? He may very well do that. Will Muschamp may just feel a little bit different about that. It's also probably true that Muschamp was a head coach a lot longer than Matt Luke was. Not to put Luke's business out there, but there's a really good chance that Muschamp's just got a lot more money than Matt Luke does. Luke has been. Muschamp was an SEC coach for a long time, and he's probably got millions. Whereas someone who was just a coach for a lot less amount of time doesn't have that kind of net worth built up. Once again, not to put his business out there, but that is a part of this discussion. So Muschamp may have more financial flexibility to take the job that he wants. So one way or another, there's so much smoke around Muschamp to Georgia that my assumption is he's involved in the program somehow. But he would have his reasons, I believe, for not wanting to be defensive backs coach. And he might have his, curiosity piqued about year from now, 2 years from now, am I a commodity again to potentially interview for head coaching jobs, or do I need to kind of be a defensive coordinator at a program where I'm comfortable, a place like Georgia? Dennis Dodd reported that Muschamp turned down the Texas defensive coordinator job this offseason. Danny Blackman, very funny line on YouTube. Bank 6 had the idea of a doubleheader, but like Georgia, Florida, LSU, Alabama doubleheader. That'd be really fun. Really fun. West Georgia Dog fan says Muschamp likes working behind the scenes. That's probably also very true as well. I mean, I've said this before. For a lot of my friends who are high school football coaches and high school coaches in general, there is something really attractive to not being the one who's the focal point for all the criticism that comes. There's parents, there's pressure to win. There's, some of these high school coaches face administrative pressure to, you have to account for every dollar that comes to the program, things like that. There's just a lot of pressure associated with being a head coach. And obviously when it comes to the big world of the SEC, that's even more true. And so to be able to, as Muschamp, I think, told Chip Towers, to be able to talk ball and not have to be the guy that's under all the microscope getting all the attention, I got to say, if money's not an issue for you, the chance to be around a team without any of the pressure that comes from being a part of that team, I would imagine that's probably a pretty good life. Not forever, but for a while. We've seen some of those analysts at Alabama stay multiple years. Charlie Strong's been at Bama now a couple of years. I think he's about to go be a coach with Urban Meyer Jacksonville, but he's been around for a while. Mike Stoops is apparently going to be around a little longer than he intended to be. Matt Rukavina referencing the old Brian Niedermeyer tweet about the big bank takes little bank when it comes to Jim Chaney. Yeah, you better believe of the recent infamous social media statements around the SEC, Niedermeyer on Chaney certainly ranks pretty high up there. Chris Slim White says why anyone would want him as a coach besides he played at Georgia. So this is one of those where I'm going to get mocked, and I do get mocked for this. I still think Muschamp could be a pretty good coach. I really don't understand why it hasn't never got much better at South Carolina, but I still think Muschamp could be a pretty good coach. Isaac Cruz says Eddie needs some Savage pads. Yeah, stay on me about that because I do think that would look really good. And the Isaac says stop overlooking this comment. Yeah, Isaac, I would never want to do that. Somebody also mentioned the commitment chain. I want to make the commitment chain thing a little bit more of a factor on the program. As I said before, I had a chance to buy one. There was this guy walking around Jacksonville before the Georgia-Florida game, and he's selling. I don't know that he thought of them as commitment chains. He just selling a souvenir. But it looked exactly like the commitment chain that Marius Mims was wearing. I was like, hey, how much you want for that commitment chain? He's like, $30. I can't buy that for $30. Georgia and Olive says the mic looks like one for a radio show for sound only. It seems a little awkward for a visual show like DawgNation obscures BA's handsome face. Well, first of all, Georgia, and I appreciate you saying that. So here's my theory on this. You can tell me if I'm wrong, Georgianne. I actually think with the microphone like right here where it is, you see more of my face than to those who would want to, which may not be that very many people. But when the other microphone was straight ahead and I'm kind of leaning down on it like that, I feel like you see more of my face now than you did before. But it's also one of those things, too. It's like where anything new, it's just hard to get used to. For a number of reasons, I think this is going to be better over time. I do. But thank you for weighing in, Georgianne. I appreciate that. And thank you for the compliment, too. I certainly won't turn that down. Marvin Fairley looking forward to seeing some changes in Georgia's secondary. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Really a chance for some people to step up and play well. Keith Folds would love to have Muschamp as defensive backs coach. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly a high-energy coach. Philip Jordan Wells referencing King Kong versus Godzilla. I did see this is coming out. I guess I'm more of a King Kong fan than Godzilla. I guess I'd root for King Kong. I don't know why. I don't know, like King Kong tears up United States, Godzilla tears up Tokyo. I don't know if that's like USA Pride or whatever else, but I guess I would probably root for King Kong against Godzilla. And my assumption is that King Kong has got to be way stronger, right? Way stronger. Isaac Cruz bringing up a pretty good point about the chance to see the Dan Mullen clown shirt. Randy Hall says King Kong has grown. Yeah, I remember I didn't see the most recent, I guess the Peter Jackson King Kong that came out a few years ago, but that one from like the late 70s that used to come on TV sometimes when I was a kid, I used to love that movie. Joel Moody likes Bigfoot. That'd be a good movie. Brandon Griffin brings up a pretty good point. With a young secondary, more pressure on that front seven to get after the quarterback. And really, if you do that to the degree that you think is possible, all of a sudden now, the challenge of a new-look secondary isn't quite as significant as it was before. William Perry's laughing at me for not spending $30 in the commitment chain. I think the problem is if I'd gone to it like expense the commitment chain, I think my bosses would looked at me like, what in the world is this? Cody Ledoux says I've got to rewatch the movies. Yeah, I've never really even seen very many of the Godzilla movies. When I was a little boy, like I'm talking a very small child, they used to come on a lot on Sunday mornings. It was like when I was a kid on Sunday mornings, I used to love the old. I'm gonna sound like 100-year-old dork, but I used to love watching the old Lone Ranger show on Sunday mornings, and then you'd kind of roll from that. I think it was like maybe the Cisco Kid after that, and then after that they'd start running a bunch of Godzilla movies. Like I'm literally that old, so I used to watch a bunch of them back then. But the Godzilla thing it just never really mattered much to me. Bill McConnell says he thinks the primate would have the advantage over the reptile. That's probably true. I mean, primates have much larger brains, right? Much larger brains. Jay Shipes. That's pretty fun. Thomas Tyson said he used to have a bunch of Godzilla VHS tapes. Corey Doyle says, do you remember having to race to the TV to make sure you didn't miss your show? Yeah, you better believe I remember that. I try to tell my kids about that sometimes, and they're so confused about the idea that, TV viewing wasn't on demand. Michael Porter says Godzilla's king of monsters, though. Maybe so. Does he breathe fire? I mean, obviously, you saw that from Game of Thrones, that if you breathe fire, that's pretty much game over. I really don't know what King Kong can do to counterbalance that. It's kind of like you got to get inside. Like if you're King Kong, you got to get inside to work the body. I would say that Godzilla has the reach advantage, but King Kong wants to kind of get inside. I'd watch that movie. I'm generally speaking, I am here for crossover movies. King Kong versus Godzilla. Superman versus Batman, which I actually don't think I've seen. Freddy versus Jason. I enjoyed that. I kind of like crossover movies. In fact, I think there should be more of them. G. Grace Bama Boy says if King Kong wins, it's a setup. He's not Godzilla level. Well, you know, whatever it is, G, it's going to be for whatever you got to do to get ready for the sequel. Scott Harris said he watched the test pattern until cartoons started on Saturday morning. So I had the opposite of that. When I was a kid, Georgia Public Television would, and maybe other stations did this too, they'd play the national anthem and then they'd go off the air. That was such a weird thing. It was like, and I used to always kind of like to watch this for some reason. I think actually some stations played the national anthem, and I think Georgia Public Television played Ray Charles singing "Georgia on My Mind." But you would you'd play the song, and then when that was done, it just started doing like the snow, like the shh. So I used to always like to watch the stations go off the air. Stoney Jackson says that King Kong's got a weapon. He's got an axe. I didn't know that. Robbie Pearson says, do I remember the days we used to go an hour and a half, 2 hours? Yeah, the problem is we got people that got stuff to do. Matt Rukavino like Space Ghost, Squidbillies. Hugh Nash says, did I ever change the channels on the TV and mess with the rabbit ears to get the show to come in? Yeah, you better believe I did that. I mean, this is how old I am. Like, I watched some fairly big sporting events on a black and white television. Listen, I did not grow up, in the Vanderbilt household, although I was well taken care of. But, I mean, it's not like we were, rich growing up. I watched the 92 NLCS, the game that Sid slid. I watched that game on a black and white television that was roughly the size of my laptop screen. And, I mean, so, yeah, I've seen a lot of big sporting events on, as you said, a TV that you have to get up and walk over to change the channel on. I've absolutely done that. Some of you younger folks probably have a hard time believing that, but you better believe that. Joel Moody says, I was burning the midnight oil at a young age. Yeah, I did stay up a little late for a young kid. I used to watch like Twilight Zone reruns on Channel 46 and things like that. Jermaine King said, I didn't know this. This is kind of cool. VH1 would play Whitney Houston's Star Spangled Banner, I'm assuming the one from the Super Bowl, and then go off the air. I did not know that. That's pretty cool. But that's exactly what a lot of TV stations used to do. They used to play the national anthem and go off the air. Paul Lee, that's a pretty good point. Isaac Cruz says clothes hanger and tinfoil days. Yeah, a lot of that. BJ Weiss says both Kong and Godzilla are both from an ancient race of monsters. They were having a war. This is the last fight for the title. That sounds like a pretty good premise to a movie for me. Sounds like a pretty good premise to a movie. Matt Rugavina says had to explain what camera film was to his children. Yeah, I definitely remember my parents buying film for a camera. Robert Reynolds, you've got the chains. We may have to talk about this, Robert. That's good to know. That's very good to know. Philip Jordan said he was 46 minutes late, made one Godzilla comment and took over the rest of the show. I will say this. I've been rewatching the old Entourage on HBO. I don't know what made me think about this. I'm talking about old stuff. It's like when that show first came out, it seemed like the height of coolness. And you go back and watch this now, especially the early seasons, how dated it all seems because, when they're when they're videoing something, you see somebody like holding a camcorder as opposed to what we would do now, which is hold up a phone, no social media, things like that. It's kind of funny, even these shows that are not really all that old, how dated they all seem now just because of how quickly things change. Don McPherson says, is it a slow sports day? Yeah, maybe a little bit. I absolutely remember the old USA, horror movie stuff. By the way, Chad Buchanan says snag Corey Raymond and Eli Ricks while we're at it. Yeah, I guess I've sort of white flagged both Ricks and Raymond for now. And frankly, I'm getting pretty close to doing the same thing for a Rick Gilbert. So I mentioned this on one of our shows recently that some of those LSU-related moves that I was hoping to speak into existence are just not really coming together the way that I hoped. That is not coming together the way I hoped. All right, let's get ready to go. Courtney Fisher, good to have you in the comments section. Thanks for being here today, Courtney. I'm glad to see you. Brandon Griffin brings a pretty good point that Godzilla, being reptilious, is that a word, would have more in common with a gator than King Kong would. So as a Georgia fan, you may have an obligation to cheer for King Kong in that. Jacob Thompson. My kids do know what CDs are because the radio in our car still has a CD player, so they do know what those are. GB2, such a good point. When you had to wait for a song to come on the radio to record it on a cassette, very much remember that. Very much remember that. Scott Harris says wrestling at Braves games. I had heard they had done that one time. I heard Ted Turner, was he the one that did the headlock and wedlock night where you had wrestling and somebody got married? That's really funny. All right, this is fun, y'all. Thanks for doing this. Good stuff. Hope y'all have a great, great day today. Appreciate you being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. By the way, make sure you check them out for all your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, and electric needs. They will take really good care of you on that. I'll also remind you to make sure you check out the AJC for your Atlanta News Now. Great way to stay up to date on everything happening in your world. Obviously, there's a lot of important stuff to be aware of, and the AJC can provide you on that. More information related to the funeral services for Hank Aaron, private service, obviously, today. You can find out more about that. And also some big moves going on with Delta Airlines. You can kind of check up on that. And maybe an NBA All-Star game coming to Atlanta sooner rather than later. With the baseball All-Star game on the horizon, maybe the NBA All-Star game coming up here pretty soon too. So check out all of your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. And we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. And we'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Have a great day, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.